So far we introduced the row level functions, and the definition of row level means the function is applied on each single row and generates a single value for that row. So you have a row, you get you have a value like a string, a varchar, and we apply a row level like a row level function like upper and generate the uppercase string of your varchar. And this value will be corresponding to this row. So each row apply the row level function once and generate one value. Each row has a corresponding result. This is what we call the row level function. You have the function is applied to one row each time and generate one value for that row each time. What we are going to talk about now is the aggregation function. And from the name, you can see that this one works to multiple rows and it works on multiple rows and generate one result. This result applies to a set of these rows. All these rows will corresponding to one value. It's actually pretty straightforward. If you look at statistical functions, you have already seen like the sum or the average. All these functions applies to a set of data and getting one result, right? So it's no surprise that you see sum and average here. So for sum and average is write as AVG, sum writes as SUM, right? Sum and average will be applicable to numerical value, integer and decimal. And then we also have maximum and minimum. Maximum and minimum are actually applicable both to numerical value and the char and the varchar value. We will talk about how char and the varchar are sorted later on, how we will compare the which one is bigger between different chars and the varchars. But basically at this point, I think all we need to know is maximum and minimum are applicable to both numerical value and to the string text value. And finally, we have a count function. Count function is an interesting function because what you are counting may be what the SQL is counting may not be what you want to count. When you do a sum, count is something that we call a non-transitive function. When you count sum a sum, you still get the sum, right? Let's say we have a sum, a bunch of values that are sum, and you try to sum it. You get the sum of sum. A sum of sum is still sum. Similarly, a maximum of maximum is still a maximum, and the minimum of minimum is still minimum. But count is different. Count in that the count of count is not a count. It's not the count of the lowest level, right? So you need to understand. So for a very important thing for count is you need to understand what you are counting on. There are three different ways of counting. First of all, you are counting what value, how many values you have in this column. Let's say I'm counting student name. What am I counting? Am I counting the student name column? I'm not counting the column. Actually, I'm counting the values in the student name column. So what I'm doing is I'm going row by row. If there's a value, I'm going to count it as one. One more value, two, three values, three, so on and so forth. And this is the first count we have. It's a count column name. It will return you the number of rows where a value exists. A not now value exists. So if I have, let's say I have 5 rows in this table and the 4 of them are student name and 1 is now, then the count of student name will return me 4. Even if I have, even if all 4 maybe Luke Skywalker, right? I'm still getting the value of 4, the count of 4, because I have 4 rows with value in this column. I have 4 separate individual student name in this data set, although they may be duplicated. But what if I want to count the number of all rows, regardless whether they are null or not? That's the second one. Count star. count star will return you the number of rows regardless of a value in any column. It basically gives you the count of all rows. So now you can see what's the difference between a column and a count star. Count star count all rows. Count column only counts how many values, non-null values are there. I think I accidentally covered that. So I want to highlight this part, not null. When you do a count column, you are counting the non-null values inside this column. When you are doing a count star, you are counting regardless they are null or not. But as we said, in count column, even if the count column only counts rows with value, it doesn't care whether this value is, even if all the value are the same value, all the value have the same value, all the rows have the same value. It will count each one as one individual. So if Luke Skywalker shows up 4 times, I'm going to count it 4. What if I only want to see how many distinct values we have? In that case, you will do a count column name with a distinct inside. And of course, there's a space between distinct and the column name. Then this time, they will give you the number of unique values in the column, not counting now. Now, in this case, will not be counted as one appearance. It's not going to be a one distinct value. So if I have a Luke Skywalker, I have Obi-Wan Kenobi, I have a now, then the count distinct will give me 2. Luke Skywalker maybe 4 times, Obi-Wan Kenobi maybe 2 times, but they are 2 distinct values. And I have a now, which is not any value. So now, let's talk a little bit more about now. In general, nows are ignored in aggregation. The only exception is count star. So I think the best way actually is to show you with some SQL example. So I created, because this are actually pretty straightforward, but once you see that in action, you will know how this is supposed to be working. So I created 4 tables. I'm also going to insert some value. Now you can see that I'm inserting some numeric value to the tuition column. 180, now 50, 250, 500, right? Okay, so let's do a sum. I think sum is simple. You are just adding up. The result is 930. Is that 930? So we have a 180 plus 50. 50 is 230. 230 plus 200 is 430. 430 plus 500 is 930, right? And then we have aggregation. We have an average. Now, average is an interesting question. Average supposedly is the sum divided by count rows, right? But it's easy to get a sum. One thing to note, we mentioned that anytime there is a now, the calculation when now is involved in calculation, the result will be now. But sum is treated differently because in sum calculation, in all aggregation function calculation, you will ignore the now. So although you see we have a now here, let me expand this a little more so that you see we have a now here, right? So if you are trying to add this up manually, you are adding 180 plus now plus all these things, you will get now because you are adding now to a value, and anything calculation with now will return you a now. However, SQL performs differently than manual add up. What it does is it goes through each row again, getting the value in each row, but only apply the SQL action, which is sum here. It only applies SQL action to non-null rows, which means when SQL comes to here, it picks us 180. When it comes here, it sees it's a null, so it ignores this row. So the value now never enters calculation. This is very important. First of all, because it tells you why when you do a sum on a column which may contain null, you will never get a null because nulls are ignored, right? Unless all the rows are null, that's a different story, then you get a null. But as long as there's one value, this value, all the non-null values will be calculated, and the null values will be ignored. It never enters the calculation. So this tells you sum will give you value. It will not give you null as long as there's a valid data. The second issue will be more apparent when we look at average. So we have 5 rows here, right? And we already see the sum is 930. What should be the average? Remember, you are removing a null. So you are actually averaging 930 over 4 rows, not over 5 rows. Oops. Oops, sorry, I think this should be average. I'm averaging the wrong tuition. So it's 232. Let me bring up a calculator just to prove my point. So 930 divided by 4 is 232.5, which is the value we get. So the average is averaging across 4 rows, not 5 rows. Why? Because 1 row is now ignored. So this is very important, that how SQL executes this sum or average. It goes through each row by row, ignore the null rows, and eventually sum up all the values, sum up all the valid values, or do the average across these valid rows. That's when you have this average of divided by 4 instead of divided by 5, right? So when we start learning SQL, I told you guys that the process of SQL execution, this row by row concept, you must have that in mind. We will come back to this concept again and again. And here is an example, and we will see more examples later on. And now we have a minimum tuition. Why do I get a course? I think when I create this SQL, I was trying to change that from the previous semester. And then I just changed them halfway. So which is 50 and 500. You can see that now we have a null here, but now is neither the minimum nor the largest, nor the maximum. It's not a minimum. Minimum is 50. It's not a maximum. It's a maximum is 500. Now is not treated as 0 either. If I have, let's say I have a value of minus 50, you will still see the minimum as minus 50. You're not going to see the null. Null is not treated as 0. It's ignored. Okay, it's ignored in the aggregation function. Now, let's try to do some count. I think these are just illustration purpose, right? Let's do some, this count star, count instructor name, count distinct instructor name are really simple. You count star, there are 6 rows in course. You count the instructor name. There are 6 instructor names because in course table, there's no null instructor names. How about you count distinct? You get 4 because Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda each have 2 courses, right? So there are 4 instructors. Now, let's play with something even more fun. Null in function, which is actually a null of, which is a table of null. So I'm going to create this table and insert a bunch of values, right? You see, I have a -1, 1, 1, 2, 3, and null. Now let me select sum ID. Before we sum, think about this. -1 + 1 + 1 + 2 + 3. What's the result? It's 6, right? Now, maximum and minimum. Minimum is -1. That's what I said. Now it's not 0. It's not the minus. It's not the minimum. It's not max. It's not 0. It's not involved in any comparison. Maximum is 3, right? Now, average. Now it's a challenge question. What's the average? We already know the sum is 6, and we already know there are 6 rows. Am I going to get 1? And I already write it here, and we just see another example. Now it's not counted in average, right? So we are actually averaging this 6 over 5 rows. Oops, what did I do? What I should get is 1.2. The fact that it has so many zeros means there's a division. Okay, so this is 1.2. Now let's do a count. We already see there are 5 rows with the ID, 1 row with a null. So what if I count ID? What am I going to get? You guys think about it, give an answer in your heart. And the answer is 5. How about star? Count star will provide you with all the rows, the number of rows without any, regardless whether it's a null or not, which is 6, right? Now, how about count ID? Oops, count, I think I accidentally add 1 more, but how about, I accidentally pressed it before I want to ask you a question. Distinct ID returns 4 because we have -1, 1, and 2, and 3, right? Now it's not counted as a distinct value, okay? So let me drop the table, and we will go to a new session.